What's going on, besties? Today we're going to be talking about specific topics covered in the ATI TEAS version 7 reading. Let's get started. We're going to begin by locating specific information in the text. We want to find relevant information that's within that text, asking us what problem are we trying to solve, or what decision am I trying to make? In order to identify this, we usually follow one of 4 steps. So step 1 is you want to read the question first. As always, specifically when it comes to reading, you want to read the question first. Step 2, you want to find the passage's topic sentence and main idea. Remember that topic sentence is usually that first sentence of the paragraph, and the main idea is the last sentence of that paragraph. Step 3, you want to read that supporting detail. So carefully read through the details that follow that topic sentence. Focus on how these details expand upon or explain that main idea. And you want to pay attention to examples, facts, statistics, or anecdotes that are used to support that main idea as well. And then lastly, with step 4, is there anything that's missing? Or is there any information that maybe is considered irrelevant to the topic or the main idea? So we want to evaluate whether all of that information that we read is really conclusive to what the topic is talking about. We want to look for gaps in logical reasoning, as well as areas that maybe need additional information. We want to identify any details or elements that do not directly relate to the main idea or seem to be out of place. And then we want to determine if the provided information thoroughly and effectively supports the main idea. So let's take a look at an example. So starting with reading our question first, it asks, what factor mentioned in the study significantly disrupts sleep cycles in adults? So we're looking at what is disrupting our sleep cycle as adults. So starting with our topic sentence. In a recent study on sleep patterns, researchers discovered several factors that affect the quality of sleep in adults. Here's our supporting details. The study emphasized the role of a consistent sleep schedule and the impact of electronic devices on sleep quality. It was found that exposure to blue lights from screens before bedtime significantly disrupts sleep cycles. However, the study did not elaborate on the effects of dietary habits of sleep, focusing primarily on environmental and behavioral factors. Here's our main idea. The researchers suggested further investigation of non-environmental factors that could influence sleep quality. So let's take a look at our options. Inconsistent sleep schedules. So that's not really something in regards to specific information that we're looking at when it comes to disrupting sleep cycles in adults. Dietary habits, as the paragraph said, it did not talk about the effects of dietary habits, so we can eliminate that. Exposure of blue lights from screens. We absolutely talked about that and how that affects our sleep cycles. And then use of traditional light sources. Again, not something that was discussed. So based out of all of the options, the correct answer that we are going to be looking at is going to be C, exposure of blue lights from screens when it comes to identifying the information in this text. So I'm going to be off screen for this one so that you can get the entirety of the screen. But this is one of my favorite parts of the TEAS is glossaries, indexes, and table of contents because they're so easy to answer. So starting with glossaries that we have over here. The definition of a glossary is a list of terms and their definitions typically related to a specific subject or field. You're usually going to find these at the end of a textbook or at a study guide, and the main purpose is really to help you understand specific terminology when it comes to the TEAS. Next, we have indexes. So an index is an alphabetical list of names, subjects with references to places where they occurred, typically found at the end of the book. So as we said, that location is usually found at the very end of the textbook or the study material, and it's to help you quickly find information on a particular topic or keyword that's found in the text. And then lastly, we have table of contents. So the table of contents is a list of chapters, sections, and often is the major subsections within them. So again, this is found at the beginning, the very beginning of your textbook or your study guide, and it's really to provide an overview of the structure and the main topics covered in that material, helping you navigate through the actual text instead of wasting your time trying to find information about specific chapters. So let's take a look at some practice questions. So starting with our first practice question, which of the following definitions correctly describes a bar graph? So we have A diagram showing the relationship between two variables using a line. B, the graph that represents data visually using bars of different heights or lengths. C, a circular chart divided into sectors illustrating numerical proportions. Or D, a collection of dots on a graph representing values of two variables. So we're going to take a look over here at our example, and we're going to look for bar graphs. So we see here, bar graphs, a graph that represents data visually using bars of different heights or lengths. So we're going back here, we're trying to figure out what the correct definition is, and we can see that B is going to be the correct answer. It's a graph that represents data visually using bars of different heights or lengths. So taking a look at our next practice question, if you're looking for information on Amazon bestsellers and a book about online marketplaces, which of the following pages should you refer to? So over here to the right of the screen, we have our index. So we're going to move down our index and find the information that we need. We're looking for Amazon bestsellers. Look, here we have Amazon, so we're getting close. Oh, and right below it, we have Amazon bestsellers. What's interesting about the T's is they are going to try to trip you up. So it's very important that you make sure you read that question, understand specifically what it's looking for. While Amazon is listed here, it's not the correct answer. We're looking for Amazon bestsellers. So based on our index, that's going to be between pages 79 and 82. Looking over here at our options, what is the best option? We do have the correct answer. Is going to be A. Amazon bestsellers is going to be on the pages of 79 to 82. And for our last question, we have a table of contents question. So in any research method textbook, where would you find information about the results of an experiment based on the table of contents? So let's take a look over here at our table of contents. So we have the abstract, dedication, acknowledgement, preface, a list of tables, figures, and schemes. Here we have some chapters. So chapter 1 is going to be the introduction. Chapter 2 is going to be method. Oh, look right here, chapter 3, we have results. So the question is about information about the results of an experiment based on the table of contents. So we have chapter 3, and we know that it is on page 18. So we're going to look over here at our options. Do we have it? Yes, absolutely we do. The correct answer is going to be A, chapter 3, page 18. So let's talk about headings and subheadings. So when it comes to headings, this is the title at the head of a page or a document. So it's going to introduce that main topic or theme that's going to be written in the passage. And then when it comes to our subheadings, that's going to be the headings underneath that main heading that provides those additional details. So it's going to break down that main topic into more specific areas or aspects. So let's take a look at an example of what this would look like. So here's an example of our headings and subheadings. So our headings are going to be in the red color, and our subheadings is going to be in more of our teal color. So a guide to mastering the barbecue. So that is our main heading, right? That is what all of this is about. And then we start to see our subheadings. So remember, this is that additional information about our main heading, our main idea. So choosing the right grill, right? Absolutely, we need to know how to choose that. It's very important. And then we have another subheading. Essential grilling tools. So we have the right grill, we're gonna have to have the tools, right? That is that next additional information underneath our main heading. Let's take a closer look with some practice questions. So I want to make something very clear when it comes to the T's. Sometimes the questions are not going to ask you to identify headings and subheadings. They're going to require you to come up with them yourself. So I wanted to give you a little bit of the harder examples because as we could see from the previous example, it was really easy to tell what was a heading and what was a subheading. But in this particular case, I want you to be able to identify what could be a good heading or subheading. So let's take a look at our first example. What is the best heading for the above passage? So remember, this is the main idea of the passage. So sleep plays a critical role in maintaining overall health and well-being. It aids in memory consolidation, muscle repair, and regulation of hormones that control growth and appetite. Poor sleep patterns are linked to various health issues, including obesity, heart disease, and depression. The importance of consistent sleep schedules and creating a conducive sleep environment are also discussed. So these are our options when it comes to identifying what would be a good heading. So nutrition and health wasn't really something that we talked about. The topic sentence is more related to sleep. The importance of exercise. Well, we didn't really talk about that either, right? We talked about issues that could be related to the overall health and well-being when it comes to sleep. C, understanding sleep and health. This sounds great, right? That sounds exactly like what we talked about in this paragraph. And mental health awareness. We did talk about depression, but it wasn't really the main focus of the passage. So based on all of the options that we have, the most correct answer is going to be C, understanding sleep and health. For our next question, it states, which of the following should be the best subheading for the section of the text? Remember, that's adding additional information. It's not what the main idea is about, it's just that additional piece. It's those supporting details. So the paragraph is, the relationship between dietary choices and heart health is a critical area of study in preventative medicine. That is our topic. This section delves into certain types of fats and cholesterol levels influence the risk of developing heart disease. It also discusses the importance of antioxidants found in fruits and vegetables for maintaining a healthy cardiovascular system. So we're looking for those supporting details, those important subheadings. So we have diet and cardiovascular health. Yes, absolutely. Those are two of the things that they talk about. So those could be our subheadings. We also have exercise and heart disease prevention. Well, it wasn't really something that was discussed within this text, so we can automatically eliminate that. Managing stress for heart health. I think that's really important. You do need to manage your stress, but it wasn't something that was explicitly stated within the passage. And then lastly, impacts of sleep when it comes to the cardiovascular system. Again, not really something that we talked about. So based out of all of the options that we have available to us, the correct answer is going to be A, diet and cardiovascular health. Next, let's talk about one of my personal favorites, and that's sidebars, underlined, bolded, and italicized text, footnotes, and legends. These are super easy to answer. So starting with sidebars, these are those short pieces of text. They're usually found alongside the margins of the main text, and they provide additional information, clarification, or examples relevant to the main text. Next, we have underlined text. So this is where they draw a little line underneath a specific word, and it can appear anywhere within the body. And it's often used to indicate some kind of importance or highlight significant terms, sometimes even used for hyperlinks when you're looking at digital text. Next, we have bolded text. So bolded texts are usually darker and thicker than their surrounding text. And again, they're found anywhere within that main body. They're used to emphasize keywords, headings, making them stand out and easier to identify. Next, we have italicized text, and this is kind of that slanted to the right kind of text. Again, it appears in the main body, and it's used to emphasize, to denote titles of work, or to highlight foreign words or even phrases. Next, we have footnotes. Footnotes are additional information and citations found at the bottom of the page. It's usually located in the footer, and there's usually a reference number attached to it in order to identify what it is referencing. And then lastly, we have legends. So when it comes to legends, that's that explanatory information. It's key for understanding like figures, tables, as well as maps. And they're usually found below or beside that figure, table, or map, depending on what it is that you're looking at. So let's take a look at some practice questions to put all of this together. So as always, we want to read our question first. So according to the sidebar in the Healthy Eating Patterns chapter of Modern Nutrition, what type of content is featured? So when we're taking a look at this particular practice question, we don't even have to look at the passage itself. We're simply looking at what's down here, which is our sidebar. So let's take a look. It says experiences. Maria, who after switching to the Mediterranean diet saw remarkable improvements in her cholesterol levels and overall heart health. Another story is about John, who managed to control his type 2 diabetes and reduce his medication significantly by adhering to this diet. So going back to our question, according to the sidebar in the Healthy Eating Patterns chapter of Modern Nutrition, what type of content is featured? So we have statistical data on the popularity of different diets. Well, we know that's not true. It didn't talk about that at all. We have B, personal accounts related to the Mediterranean diet. Absolutely, we had two examples of where that was featured. C, scientific explanation of diet benefits. Didn't really talk about that. And then lastly, D, recipes related to healthy eating patterns. There was no recipes there at all. So based on our conclusion with what we read in that sidebar, we know that the correct answer is going to be B, personal accounts related to the Mediterranean diet. Our next practice question, in the context of the provided passage, what does the bolded term biodiversity refer to? So let's take a look at our passage. In the study of ecosystems, the concept of biodiversity is fundamental. Biodiversity refers to the variety of life in a particular habitat or ecosystem. That is our definition right there. It tells us specifically what it is about. So going back to our practice question options, we have a protection of natural habitats. Nope, doesn't talk about that. B, the variety of life in a specific area or ecosystem. Yes, that is the correct answer based on that sentence that refers to what the specific definition is. But let's look at our last two options. The process of species becoming extinct. Didn't even talk about that. And the climate and weather patterns of an ecosystem. No. So based on all of the options that we have available to us, we were able to answer this question quickly and deduce that B, the variety of life in a specific area or ecosystem, is the correct answer. Next, let's talk about common elements of graphs as well as maps. So you're going to have different things that you're going to have to be able to identify. They being title, labels on the X and Y axes, scale, and legend. So let's break each one of these down. So first we have title. So the title of the graph gives that concise description about what the graph is specifically about. You're usually going to find it always at the top of your graph, and it's going to help you identify what the main topic and focus is. Then we have the label for our X and Y axes. So these labels describe what each axis represents. So our X axis is going to be horizontal, and our Y axis is going to be on the other side, and it's going to be vertical. Next, we have scale. So a scale is a graph that indicates the units of measure and the value each increment of the axis that it represents. So if you take a look over here, this is your scale. This is what is breaking down specifically how big something is, how small something is, what the population is in this particular case. It's going to give you a unit of measure. And then lastly, you're going to have legends. So a legend is that explanatory information or key of understanding figures, tables that are going to be found on the map. So let's take a look at some practice questions to kind of break this down and what the TEAS might specifically ask you. Starting with our first question. According to the map of Los Angeles, California, what is the distance in kilometers between Torrance and Compton? So if you take a look here, you have two different kinds of distances. So this is where the TEAS is going to mess you up. So you have kilometers and you have miles. So this particular question is asking about kilometers. So what I usually do is I'll take like a little piece of paper. I know it's kind of hard to see, but I'll line it up with the actual graph that is on the TEAS. And I'll usually make like a little line, and this is my 0 kilometers. As I'm measuring out, here's another little line in the middle, that would be about 10. And then we have another little line here at the end, and that is 20 kilometers. And I take that and I actually lay it on top of my graph to kind of get what it is that I'm trying to figure out. So I'm trying to figure out the kilometers. What is the distance between these 2 points on a map? So if you take a look, the distance between Torrance and Compton, it's a little bit more than 10 kilometers, right? We know that this middle line right here is 10 kilometers, but it's not quite 20, right? We're not quite at 20 kilometers. So when we're taking a look at our answers and we're trying to make the best educated guess, we know that 8 kilometers is incorrect. That would be kind of on this side. Then we have 10 kilometers. Well, we know it's not 10 because it's a little bit more than that. We have 20 kilometers. Again, that would have to be all the way at the end of our little scale here, so we know that's not correct. So lastly, we have 12. It's a little bit more than 10, not quite 20. The only answer out of everything that we have to make our best educated guess would be D, 12 kilometers. So our next question states, according to the graph, how many sales did the North Division make in 2023? So we're going to take a look at our graph here. So we have different color variations, right? We have a blue, we have a red, we have a teal, and we have a purple. And we have a little key up here that's telling us which color corresponds to which division. So based on our question, we're looking for the North Division. So we know we're going to be looking at blue. But we also have a breakdown in years here, right? We have 2021, 2022, and 2023. So again, we're looking for North Division in 2023. So we're going to be looking at blue here at the end of our graph, and we're going to just kind of best guesstimate how many sales that they made. So based on this, if we were to follow this line over, it looks like they made about 20,000 sales. So based on all of the options that we have available to us here, our best educated guess is going to be that the North Division made about 20,000 sales in 2023. Let's talk about biased and misleading information when it comes to graphics. So graphics like charts, graphs, maps, and tables are going to be powerful tools for presenting data and information. However, they can sometimes be used to convey biased or misleading information, whether it's intentional or unintentional. There are key things that you're going to need to be able to identify. So starting here with our manipulating scale. The scale of a graph can be manipulated to exaggerate or downplay certain data trends. So for instance, a graph may show a steep rise, or it might show a steep fall by using a compressed scale, or it might minimize significant changes by using an expanded scale. So if you take a look here, based on this, they say increasing sales every year, and they have this steep rise that's taking place. But if you take a look here, you can see that it's kind of back and forth, right? So we were doing really good up to 1940, 1950, somehow the scales went down. Then in 1960, they went back up, but then look at this, 1970, 1980, they were kind of down again. 1990 and then 2000s, it came back up, and then in 2010, they went back down again. So again, this is manipulating the scale to make it appear that the data trend is increasing every single year. And then we have selective data presentation. So picking selective data to support a specific narrative while omitting contradictory data can be used to skew a presentation. So if we take a look at this graph, we have nursing bedside shortage from 2020 to 2025. So if we take a look, we have 2020 about 100%, 2021 it increases in 2022, further increases in 2023. Then we have a massive increase in 2024, and then it's just going to continuously increase as we see over the years. But what's interesting about this argument is it doesn't talk about the bedside nurses that still hold their license that are just not working at the bedside anymore. So certain graphs are going to prevent selective data in order to really push their argument forward. So it's really important that when you're looking at graphs that you're being critical of the information that you're seeing and look for sources that either confirm or deny that information. Some additional bias or misleading graphs that you might see is misrepresenting correlations. So graphs can imply correlations or causations between variables that may not exist or may be more complex that's actually represented. So if you look here, we have home interest rates over the last 5 years. If you were to look at this, you would say, wow, they've maintained 5% since from 2019 to 2023. But all of a sudden in 2024, they're going up 7%. What was up with that huge increase between the last several years until this year? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? Sometimes individuals might use graphs like this to misrepresent or to bias you into purchasing something stating, oh, well, if you don't do it now, it's going to go up the next year. So you have to be really critical when you're looking at these kind of graphs when it comes to the T's. And then lastly, we have inappropriate graph types. When we're using graphs that aren't suitable to the kind of data that we have, we're going to distort the viewer's overall understanding of what we're trying to represent. So if you take a look here, we have temperature changes in 2023. They've used a circle graph for some reason, right? Why am I using a circle graph when it comes to temperature changes? If I'm looking at this, it's not really telling me how those temperatures have varied over the year. So to me, this would have made much more sense to actually put it in a line graph as opposed to a circle graph. So really, again, be hypercritical of the graphs you see. Let's take a look at some practice questions to break this down. So practice question 1, we have a bar graph displays a company's annual sales from 1900 to 2020 and states that each year the sales have increased. How does the bar graph mislead regarding the company's sales trends from 1900 to 2020? By omitting sales data for certain years. Well, if we take a look here, we have a pretty consistent decade for each bar graph, so we can automatically eliminate that. By incorrectly showing a continuous increase in sales each year. Well, yes, absolutely. As we can see, we have dips in some of these years, so that is absolutely misleading. by using a bar graph instead of a line graph. Well, we could have used a line graph as well, but that's not really what's misleading. By not showing sales figures for the year of 1990. So again, we do have sales figures for 1990. So based on all of the options that we have available to us, the only correct answer that makes sense would be B, by correctly showing a continuous increase in sales for each year. And lastly, when it comes to the topics of graphs, let's talk about how they can actually strengthen arguments. So as we know, graphs are really great tools when it comes to enhancing persuasiveness and clarity of a point being made. They provide visual data that can immediately convey trends, comparisons, and relationships that might not be as obvious as we would see with textual descriptions. So for example, a well-designed graph can succinctly show the increase in graduate nurse turnover variability over time, making it easier for the audience to grasp and remember the key arguments. So if you take a look at this graph, graduate nurse turnover rates from 2019 to 2023. So in 2019, prior to the COVID pandemic, the turnover rates weren't really large, right? But as we start to get into the COVID pandemic, look at how much they skyrocketed, right? 30, 40, well, I should say 30, like 35, almost 40%. And then in 2023, it was right at 40%, just a little bit above. So when we have hospital administrators that are trying to make an argument regarding the screening processes when it comes to graduate nurses, or maybe trying to implement programs for retention to lessen these numbers, graphs really can be helped with that persuasive aspect of trying to get their point across so that they can develop things like programs and better screening tools to help maintain graduate nurses within the field. Let's talk about words or phrases when it comes to sequence of events. We talked about this in a previous video, but it is going to be touched upon several times throughout the TEAS exam. So transition words and phrases for sequence of events. They're broken down by these categories. So we have before, first, next, sometimes, and last. So starting with before, this is things that are going to happen in the past. So we're going to be looking at words like earlier, beforehand, in the past, this morning, things that happened in the past. Next we have first. So these are the initial steps when it comes to sequence of events. So you're going to see transition words like in the beginning, to begin with, first, firstly, originally. Those are the ones that you're going to see for first. Next we have next. So that's going to start after a step, right? So we have first, something happens first, and then we're going to have things like next. It's going to be the second things that happen. So you're going to see transition words like second, soon after, afterwards, then, later, those types of words. Then we have sometimes. So sometimes are transition words that happen at irregular intervals. There's not really a set time that these things happen. So you're going to see transition words like every so often, occasionally, at times, from time to time, rarely. It's something that's really irregular and it isn't very consistent. And then our last transition word is, of course, last. And that is the final point that we're making in regards to a passage. So you're going to see transition words like finally, lastly, and conclusion, to conclude, ultimately, overall. So these are really the bulk of words that you're going to see in the ATI TEAS. Really make sure that you've honed in on these words and that you understand them, because it will be important when you're taking your test. So taking a look at our practice question, the question states, based on the passage, what does the phrase every now and then suggest about Sarah's discoveries of cafes and bookstores? So this is a classic example of where you don't really need to read the passage, because the question is specifically asking what it is that you need to know. So if you want to read the passage, we will, but in this particular case, you wouldn't have to. So the passage states, in her diary, Sarah chronicled her experiences as a new resident in the bustling city. She noted that every now and then she would discover a quaint little cafe tucked away in a corner of a charming bookstore hidden down an alley. These sporadic discoveries brought her immense joy in her urban explorations. So again, we're looking at what that every now and then phrase means. So we have a couple options here. We have she finds them regularly and predictable. Nope. If it's every now and then, we're not looking at something that is consistent or predictable, so we can automatically eliminate that. We have B. She comes across them continuously and without interruption. We just talked about that. This is not a continuous transition word, so we know that B is the incorrect answer. Then we have C. She stumbles upon them occasionally and at irregular intervals. Yes. Every now and then does not give us any kind of consistency or predictability. So C sounds like it would be the correct answer, but let's look at our final option. And then D, she found them once and never again. Well, that's not true because she states every now and then. So she finds them here, she finds them there at irregular intervals. So based on all of the options we have available to us, the correct answer is going to be C. She stumbles upon them occasionally and at irregular intervals. Rounding out our transition words, we have transition words and phrases with cohesion of events. So we're looking at things like when, how often, and length of time. So starting with when, that is our timing. So when we're looking at things like then, that's going to indicate what happens next in a sequence. Or if we're looking at a transition word like at this moment, it's going to show action that's happening at a specific point in time. Next, we have how often. So this is our frequency. So if we're looking at transition words like occasionally, we can suggest that an event happens from time to time, but it's not regular. And then with frequently, this is the complete opposite. It means that this event happens quite often in comparison to occasionally, right? And then lastly, we have length of time. So this is how long something has taken place. So if we use a transition word like temporarily, it's going to describe an action or event that's going to eventually stop, right? It's just temporary. It's not going to continuously keep happening. Whereas with the transition word permanently, this is going to imply a state or condition that's going to last indefinitely. So you see how we can use transition words to make a completely different meaning depending on what we're looking at when it comes to cohesions of events? Well, let's take a look at some practice questions to kind of help build upon this even further. This question states, according to the biologist's notes, what does occasionally apply about the frequency of spotted red-tailed hawks? So for this one, let's eliminate reading the passage and see if we can figure it out. So we have the word occasionally, which means that it happens from time to time, but it's not very consistent. So we have A, the hawks were observed continuously. We know that that's incorrect because it's occasionally. It's going to happen from time to time. So we can eliminate that. B, the hawks were observed rarely. That could potentially be the answer, so let's keep that in our back pocket, but let's move on to the next one. C, the hawks were observed at regular intervals. We know that's incorrect. Consistency, regular, that's not what we're talking about when we use the transition word occasionally. And then lastly, we have D, the hawks were observed sporadically. So again, that's that time to time, sporadically, occasionally. They all fit within that category of our transition words. So based on what we have, without reading the passage and just solely reading the question to save ourselves time, we know that the correct answer is going to be D, the hawks were observed sporadically. And this is the last section of this video. We're going to be talking about drawing conclusions and identifying gaps. So drawing conclusions and identifying gaps is the sequence of events that involve an understanding of like a chronological order of events and recognizing when information is going to be missing or implied that we have to kind of make up ourselves. So an inference and drawing conclusion, remember we talked about them before, they're both used interchangeably, is essentially drawing a conclusion from combining evidence and logical reasoning. So when it comes to identifying gaps, we need to kind of follow this kind of timeline. So you have to understand the timeline. Carefully read the text to understand the chronological order of events and make sure you pay attention to those transition words that we went heavily into. Those are first, then, subsequently, finally. Make sure that you're following those words. You want to identify key events. So you want to note the main events in that sequence. This can be done by highlighting or jotting down brief notes about what's happening within that mentioned text. And then you want to look for causal relationships. Determine if there is a cause and effect relationship between events. Understand why an event occurred that can actually help you in drawing a conclusion about subsequent events that might happen afterwards. You want to detect those gaps by looking for context clues. Be alert to any gaps that are going to be happening within that sequence. A gap can be an event that is not fully explained, or they could just jump somewhere into the future without having talked about what was happening during present day. Sometimes the information about the event is not explicitly stated, it's going to be more implied, so you're going to have to use your past experiences to kind of try to figure out what's missing. And then lastly, we have evaluate event outcomes. So we want to assess the outcomes of an event. We want to understand the results of each event and can provide insights to that sequence to help us draw those conclusions and the overall narrative or the argument that the author is trying to convey. Let's take a look at some practice questions of what this will look like on your test. Starting with question 1, what important step is missing in the chocolate cake baking process is outlined in the cookbook. So we're looking for a missing step out of all the steps that we have in order to bake this cake. So let's take a look at our steps. To bake a chocolate cake, the following steps are outlined in the cookbook. Number 1, gather all necessary ingredients, including flour, sugar, cocoa, baking powder, eggs, milk, and oil. So that sounds good. Number 2, we want to preheat the oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, fantastic. 3, in a large bowl, we're going to mix together the flour, sugar, cocoa, and baking powder. So we're mixing together all of our dry ingredients. Number 4, in a separate bowl, we're going to beat the eggs and then add milk and oil. So that's all of our wet ingredients. 5, we're going to combine the wet and dry ingredients and stir until the mixture is smooth. And then number 7, look at that. It looks like we're missing step 6, right? Number 7, let the cake cool in a wire rack after baking. So we're obviously missing something in between 5 and 7. So let's figure out what that is. So frosting the cake, well, that would probably happen after the cake is cooled. So while it is missing, it's not something that's missing within our steps that were provided. We have B, baking the cake in the preheated oven. Well, if you take a look, it doesn't really tell us how long that cake needs to be baked, right? So that could absolutely be the potential answer. We have C, serving the cake. Again, that's something that's going to happen after all of these sequence of events, so it's not something that's missing from our instructions. And then D, washing the mixing bowls. While that is very important, after you bake a cake, it's not necessarily something that's missing. So in this particular case, the correct answer is going to be B, baking the cake in the preheated oven. It doesn't give us specifically how long we need to bake that cake, so that would be a critical piece of information that we're missing from this text. I hope that this information was helpful in understanding the reading portion of the ATI TEAS. If you have any additional questions, like always, make sure that you leave them down in the comment section of this video. And head over to nursecheungstore.com where there's a ton of additional resources that are available to you to help you pass your ATI TEAS. And as always, I'll catch you in the next video. Bye!